Welcome to the BotCast.
All right, so today we are diving into something that's been kind of hard to ignore if you follow gaming news at all.
Yeah.
The wave of layoffs we've been seeing in the video game industry. And we're not just talking like small studios, like we're talking big players. Microsoft, Sony, EA, even Bungie.
Wow.
And, over 10,000 jobs were lost in 2023 alone. And it seems like 2024, well, it isn't looking much better.
Yeah, it's been a tough year.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and wondering what's going on, why is this happening? Well, you've come to the right place because that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah. The interesting thing here is it's not just one single reason this is happening.
Okay.
It's more like a bunch of things all happening at the same time. It's almost like a perfect storm.
I see.
If you think back to like the early days of the pandemic, I mean, everybody was stuck at home and the gaming industry rocked.
Knock off.
Oh, yeah.
Especially mobile gaming.
Exactly. Mobile games just went through the roof.
Yeah, it was like everyone and their grandma was suddenly playing Among Us.
Haha, exactly.
Yeah.
Like mobile game revenue, I think it was in 2020, it like skyrocketed.
Really?
Almost to $100 billion.
Wow.
So these companies, they see these huge numbers, and I think maybe they just assumed
That it would last forever.
right, like
Fuck
this is
yeah.
the new normal. It's just going to keep going up and up. So they started hiring more people, greenlighting all kinds of new projects.
Just riding that pandemic high.
Exactly. But
What goes up must come down.
exactly. That pace, there's no way it could have lasted. Like, eventually people started going outside again.
Yeah.
So the gaming world, it kind of had to adjust.
like a correction.
Exactly, a correction. And unfortunately, that's a big reason why we're seeing all these layoffs now.
I see. So they overhired during the boom when things were good, and now that things have cooled down.
They have to make cuts.
Right. So that makes sense, but it's not just the pandemic, right?
No.
It seems like there's another part of this.
Yeah.
Like games are expensive to make,
Oh, absolutely.
especially those big budget AAA games.
Yes. These games cost a fortune.
Like more than some Hollywood movies these days.
It's insane.
Right.
We're talking massive financial pressure.
Yeah.
I was reading that report from the CMA. They were saying that just to develop one AAA game now, you're looking at least $200 million.
Yeah. I remember reading that, and that's just the starting point.
The bare minimum.
Yeah. Like they said Call of Duty.
Oh, yeah.
Way over 300 million.
At least.
And then there was that one, I can't remember the name, but it's like some unnamed franchise.
Oh, right.
660 million
It's wild.
for development and marketing.
Combined.
It just seems crazy.
It's a huge gamble, especially these days.
Why is that?
Well, interest rates are rising, so getting the money for these huge projects.
It's a lot riskier.
Yeah, so you see companies now, they're under all this financial pressure.
Right.
So they're starting to look for ways to, make more money more consistently. So we're seeing this big push towards mobile games, things like that,
Yeah.
and live service games.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense because those live service games with the microtransactions and the expansions and all that, they make money for a lot longer than just a regular game sale.
Right. The idea is to keep that revenue coming in long after the game has launched.
Yeah.
But even those games, they come with their own challenges.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Like what?
Well, I mean, first of all, the competition is fierce.
So many games out there.
So many games, and players are kind of getting tired of being nickel and dimed,
Yeah, nobody likes microtransactions.
Right, and not every franchise is a good fit for mobile or live service.
That's true.
Like, remember when Sony tried to make The Last of Us a multiplayer game?
Oh, right.
Didn't really work out.
Yeah, so it's not so simple.
No, and here's the irony. A lot of studios, they want to make these live service games, right?
Right.
It makes sense from a business perspective,
Yeah.
but they don't actually have the infrastructure in place to support a live service game.
What do you mean by infrastructure?
Well, it's kind of multifaceted.
Okay.
It's not just one thing. You need the right technology, the right team structure.
Okay.
You need the right design philosophy right from the beginning.
Interesting.
You've got to be thinking about building a game that can grow and change over time,
Yeah.
adding new content, fixing bugs, maintaining the servers, all while keeping people engaged.
Yeah.
That requires a very different approach than just making a regular AAA game.
So it's not just about making a great game. It's about making a game that can be successful for years to come.
Exactly, and that's where things get tricky because a lot of studios, they're stuck.
How so?
Well, they know they need to move towards these live service models,
Yeah.
but they don't necessarily have the experience or the resources to actually support those games in the long run.
Oh, I see.
There was a survey recently, and it found that something like 88% of developers are worried about technical debt.
Technical debt. What is that?
It's a good question. It's basically the cost of fixing all the problems and bugs and design flaws that pile up when you're making a game,
Oh, okay.
especially these big, complex live service games.
I see.
Like, imagine you're building a house, but the foundation is shaky.
Okay.
You might be able to patch it up here and there for a while,
Right.
but eventually those problems are going to catch up to you.
You got to go back and fix the foundation.
Yeah.
So technical debt, it's kind of like kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
You might be okay for a little while,
Right.
but eventually you got to face the music.
Exactly. And for players,
Mm-hmm.
this usually means buggy games, features that don't quite work, right?
Yeah.
Just this feeling that the game is barely being held together.
Right. Like it wasn't really designed to last.
Exactly. And that doesn't exactly inspire confidence in the long run.
Definitely not. And on top of all that, these studios have investors breathing down their necks,
Right.
expecting them to just keep churning out hit after hit.
Yeah, it's got to be a tough spot to be in.
For sure. And unfortunately, it's the developers who end up paying the price.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're the ones putting in the long hours, dealing with the stress. Yeah. And then ultimately, they're the ones who lose their jobs when things go south.
It's a rough situation for sure.
It really is. And it's sad to think about all these talented teams being broken up,
Yeah.
studios shutting down.
It is a tough business.
It's like over 30 studios gone completely in just the past couple of years.
I know, it's a lot.
And all those developers looking for work.
Yeah. And it's not just like small indie teams either.
Right. These are big names.
Huge.
Arcane Austin, London Studio, Pixelopus, Volition.
And those are just the ones we know about.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how many more are out there.
Right.
And these were studios full of passionate people who loved making games.
Yeah, it really highlights the human cost of all this.
It does. And it's one of the reasons why I think we're hearing more and more about unionization in the gaming industry these days. Like you mentioned unions earlier. What's the current state of things?
Well, for a long time, unions weren't really on the radar for most game developers.
Really? Why is that?
I think it was partly a cultural thing, this idea of like the scrappy indie developer working long hours for the love of the game.
Yeah.
But with all these layoffs, the crunch time, the general lack of job security, it's like people are starting to realize that they need a seat at the table.
They need a voice.
Exactly. They need to be able to negotiate for better working conditions, better pay.
Right. And I guess one of the biggest developments on that front was the unionization effort at Sega of America.
Huge. That was a really big deal.
The first major video game company in the U.S. to form a union.
Yeah, it was a historic moment for sure.
And I'm sure it sent a message to the rest of the industry.
Absolutely. It showed that it could be done.
That it's possible.
Right.
But I imagine it's not always easy to unionize in the gaming world, right?
No, it's definitely not without its challenges.
Like what?
Well, think about it. You've got these massive corporations with thousands of employees, and then you've got tiny little indie studios with just a handful of people.
Right.
Trying to organize such a diverse workforce, it's not easy.
That makes sense. And I imagine some of those smaller studios might be a little hesitant to embrace unions.
Oh, for sure.
Especially if they're already struggling financially.
Right. There's this fear that a union will lead to higher costs, more bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And that could make it harder for them to compete.
I can see that.
But on the other hand, unions can also provide smaller studios with resources they might not have on their own.
Like what?
Legal representation, bargaining power, things like that.
Oh, okay. So that's kind of a double-edged sword then.
In a way, yeah, it's complicated.
It always is.
So where do you think this leaves the future of gaming?
I know, it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Are we headed towards an industry where it's just a few mega corporations churning out sequel after sequel?
It's a possibility.
It's kind of scary to think about.
I know what you mean.
But there's got to be some hope, right?
Oh, there's always hope.
Tell me more. I need some good news after all this.
Okay, well, even with all the layoffs and the studio closures and everything, the indie scene is still going strong.
It is.
Oh, yeah. There are tons of talented developers out there.
It's good to hear.
New studios popping up all the time, exploring new ideas, pushing the boundaries of what games can be.
So there's still innovation happening.
Absolutely. And platforms like Kickstarter and Patreon, they've made it easier than ever for indie developers to get funding directly from players.
So they don't necessarily need those big publishers anymore.
Exactly. They can maintain their creative freedom.
That's awesome. So while the big companies are busy chasing the next big hit,
Right.
the indies are free to experiment and try new things.
Exactly. And I think that's really healthy for the industry as a whole.
It is. It's good to have that diversity.
And it's not just about the developers either.
Oh, what do you mean?
I think players are changing too.
How so?
I think they're getting tired of the same old thing.
Okay.
They want something different, something unique.
They want games with heart.
Exactly.
So there's hope for the little guy.
Yeah.
There's hope for something different.
Definitely. And I think that's where players come in. Like, we have more choices than ever these days.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can choose to support those indie developers, the studios that treat their employees well, the games that are trying something new.
Yeah, it's like you said earlier, every time we buy a game.
We're voting with our wallets.
Exactly.
And it's not just about the money either.
What else can we do?
We can use our voices,
Yeah.
talk about these issues, support unionization efforts, demand better treatment for developers.
Because it matters.
It really does.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From, the pandemic and those crazy game budgets
Right.
to studios shutting down and the whole unionization movement.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is. But hopefully you, the listener, you're walking away from this with a better understanding of what's going on in the gaming world.
Yeah, and what you can do about it.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, these are the games we love.
The games we grew up with.
Yeah, and the people who make them, they deserve to be treated fairly.
Couldn't agree more.
So that brings us to our final thought for today.
Okay.
Think about the last game you played, the one you just couldn't put down.
Mm-hmm.
Now ask yourself this. Who made that game?
Okay.
What were their working conditions like?
Interesting.
Were they treated with respect? Did they have a say in how the game was made?
Because there are real people behind those games.
Exactly. Real people with real lives.
It's easy to forget that sometimes.
It is, but I think if we start paying attention to these things, if we start asking these questions,
we can make a difference.
we could become more conscious gamers
More informed consumers.
and more powerful advocates for a better gaming industry.
Everyone.
That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Well, that's our deep dive for today, folks. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep playing. But do it consciously.
Thank you for listening to BotCast. Remember to subscribe for more captivating content.